Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Maybe first, before starting this talk, I'd like to thank all the organization because we have a wonderful venue. And it's one of the first time I actually noticed that they actually read the whole presentations. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put this just after a stablecoin presentation. As you'll see, there's a lot of parallel between this one and the previous one. Not talking about the same points, but kind of building upon them. Today, I want to talk about why all roads lead to liquidity, why it's one of the most important topics in crypto, and why you're hearing 99% of the DeFi projects telling you they're a liquidity engine. Everyone is doing it, so I thought, why not explore why? And as most of the things in crypto, I want to look at through the lens, are we reinventing the wheel? Basically, are we just trying to redo what already exists in TradFi just for the sake of building it decentralized? The answer, short, is no. Maybe just before, small introduction. I'm one of the co-founders of Paladin. We're a protocol that's been live for 3 years, and for the past 2 years, so since our V2, we've basically been helping projects grow their liquidity on-chain. So we spend our time with a lot of people who are thinking about liquidity, who are struggling to get the right parameters, and our whole goal is to basically concentrate all of the smart things we have learned from these guys and give you as much information on liquidity as possible. Maybe let's start with a definition. As with a lot of things, it's not from my own idea, but it comes from a blog that's called FinTech Ruminations, is what is liquidity? At its heart, liquidity is just the ability to convert any asset into cash, or vice versa. So you have a value, and you want to convert it to something. For this reason, the more niche an asset is, the harder it is for it to be liquid, right? Because there's less people with whom you can exchange it. And that's actually a problem, because when you're going to want to convert something, you want it to be able to convert it at the fastest time possible. So the more people are ready to actually exchange against it, the easier it is. Crypto is very different, because the way we build AMMs is what we call resilient liquidity. We'll get back into it just after. But what I want you to focus on right now is that it's important to understand that liquidity is the underlying oracle of an asset's price. It's basically how the market as a whole values the asset. Now, quickly, I'd like to look at how it's built in TradFi. It's very simple. It's simple offer and demand. The more people want to buy it, the higher the value goes. The less people want to buy it, the less the value goes. The problem is when everything is not centralized in one place, you have asymmetry of demand. So for example, in certain countries, you can buy an asset at a certain price and sell it for much more expensive in another country. That's because without internet, if not everything is connected, there's this asymmetry which prices depending on the geographical location you are in. So the incarnation of this is basically order books. It's what we have in traditional centralized markets, in the public stocks, etc. In crypto, it's a bit different. Why? Because we have AMMs. This means that liquidity is available 24/7. It's still the same offer and demand cycle, but instead of having order books and matching directly people who want to buy and people who want to sell, you have an intermediary, which is an algorithm. The reason why liquidity is so important in crypto, much more than traditional finance, at least it's viewed in a different manner, is because crypto enables to create digital assets by introducing scarcity online. You have a lot of narratives in crypto that pushed Bitcoin, ETH, and many other assets to the adoptions they have now. But the truth is, the initial one, is that we're enabled to create digital assets that are scarce. It means that basically, we can actually have a fixed limit and we can guarantee you that there will be no more of these assets. So we were only able to create digital value through crypto. This is why Bitcoin is so important and everything that comes after has value. So the thing is, how do you define that any of these assets have value, right? You need people to buy them or people that want to sell them. And this is how you're able to do it. So liquidity is basically the only bridge that enables to create value in crypto. Without liquidity, crypto has no value. And that's why everyone is trying to build a liquidity engine, because they're aware that all of the value that's going to be built on top of crypto is going to be enabled by liquidity. So I hope I've unpacked the first term, because it's going to give it a bit more complex starting now. Now that we know that liquidity is the bridge, how is it manifested? I've talked about swapping, but swapping is not the only way you get liquidity. Basically, as I've mentioned just previously, liquidity is the way to convert an asset into cash. So any way that enables you to convert any asset into cash is liquidity. It's not just AMMs, it's not just swapping, it can be fundraising. So that's what a lot of projects do early on. It's much less liquid, but it's a way to get to get cash for a lot of companies, for a lot of crypto projects. But you also have swapping, as I mentioned, and lending. So all of these combined draw the picture as a whole of liquidity. Because some projects don't sell their assets, what they do is they borrow against it. So you need the whole picture of who has raised how much is being lent out, how much is being swapped out, and that's how you understand how the price pressure and the value of an asset is done. And that's what actually happens in traditional markets. So liquidity is actually a huge spectrum. When a lending protocol tells you they're a liquid layer, that's not wrong. When an AMM, or a decentralized exchange, tells you this, it's not wrong either. When the stablecoins tell you this, But that's also the case for a fundraising platform like Echo. In general, what you have to understand is that it's a huge ecosystem that's creating all of this liquidity around, and there's never going to be one central liquidity place. There's going to be a major part, but depending on the complexity of the asset, how niche they are, where their ecosystem are from, you're going to have different types of liquidity. And you have to watch them as a whole. So when you're going to be a project and you're going to want to have liquidity, you have tons of opportunities, but you can't hold liquidity by yourself, right? Because you're holding the base asset, and you're going to want to create ways to convert them into cash. You can go and see investors. That's what you do at the beginning, but the more time passes, the harder it is. You can create lending opportunities, and you can create new types of demands. For example, bringing incentives for liquidity. I'm going to talk about all three of them. I'm going to try to focus especially on liquidity in AMMs because it's the most important one today, and it's the most efficient one to convert an asset into cash. When you're a project, you're going to want to do three things, either of three things. Either you want to find people who are going to hold the liquidity for you, so that's market makers, that's large LPs. You're going to want to create demand, so just people coming in and buying and selling the asset, because the more volume there is, the more you're going to get people who are going to participate organically into providing this liquidity, or you're going to want to own the liquidity yourself. That's something we've done ourselves at Paladin, something a lot of other projects do. It means that you have a lot less risk and that the costs are way down. Why are the costs down? Well, that's because there's a ton of risk. I've mentioned just before, I'm going to come back, there's three types of profiles who are going to hold the liquidity. There are projects, usually your own, yourself, which we call protocol-owned liquidity. They have an incentive in holding that value because it enables them to have permanent liquidity. You have funds. These guys are here because they think they can profit from the strategy, and it gives them a hedge to the actual investment that they've done. And the last one are the retail investors. So it's the usual people. To be honest, providing liquidity is kind of complex, so doing it by yourself usually means there's going to be a lot of risk implemented. Unfortunately, we've kind of sold it as something that everyone could do on an AMM, but when you look at the results on Uniswap, for example, V3, half of the people are actually losing money when they're providing liquidity. And the truth is, it's a lot of people who don't do this as a full-time job because of how much volatility you have, how much impermanent loss, and all the other risks that are included. It's actually quite hard to make money on it. But these are the three profiles of people who can provide liquidity, and you should tailor to who is the most active around your project, right? Now, I've talked a lot about risk. I'm going to talk specifically about the risks for liquidity swapping. There's a ton of them. I don't want to get specifically into them, but you have, of course, the smart contracts, which are dependent on the protocol you're actually using. You have a minor extractable value, which is just honestly people exploiting the project to take value out of the swaps. You have impermanent loss, which is something that is getting perfected, but we're still working on it. It's an inherent flow of AMMs. And then you have what we call loss versus rebalancing, which is in the same vein. The idea is that today, despite the potential incentives that you might have in providing liquidity that I've just mentioned before, it's insufficient. Most of the LPs actually lose money. So how do you do to incentivize people to deposit money? Because all the projects don't have enough by themselves to just by default providing protocol and liquidity, right? Well, what you do is you mitigate with incentives. So the first type of incentives you have is swap fees. That's organic. And the more demand you have, the better it is. But a lot of projects don't have a lot of demand initially, right? They want liquidity to create demand. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. So what you do is you can have rebalancing rewards. That's also native stuff, but it's very low right now. And the last and the most popular one is basically additional incentives. So it means that you're going to pay an additional part of rewards in order to incentivize people to provide that liquidity. This is what we call liquidity mining. I'm going to get to it just after. But it's important to understand that this is done because in the current paradigm of liquidity, to kickstart a project's liquidity, pure organic incentives are insufficient. So how do you incentivize this liquidity today? You have liquidity mining, which is the godfather of all. You have vote incentives. You have points. I know we've already heard about points, but we're going to get back to it, I'm sorry. And then you have something that's very new, which is called liquidity matching, on which I'm very bullish, but there's nothing that's worked yet on it, so it's going to be with NFA, just under. Okay, so all these four exist, and their goal is basically to incentivize people to bring in liquidity, right? May it be investors, professionals, or retail. First one is liquidity mining. So this started by Compound in 2020. I don't know if some of you remember. If you're traveling and just working around crypto, you were probably financed by one of these liquidity mining campaigns at the beginning. There's YAM, there was a lot of legendary farms. It was very, very simple. The idea was you deposit incentives, they're streamed to the people who are providing liquidity, and that's it. But the more we went into it, the more we realized it was a very simple system, and that the power of crypto was to create very tailored and adapted systems, crypto economic system around the projects. So we went more into complexity afterwards, and we thought, hey, instead of just distributing incentives to whoever is just providing liquidity, maybe we can do better. And that's where vote incentives happened. Basically, the idea is projects control a set amount of emissions that is programmatically controlled. You don't get rocked. There's no liquidity mining system that just stops at some point. And the idea is that you enter into a tokenomics game where the more of the token you hold, the more you can keep directing liquidity. And it creates highly aligned partners. Of course, a lot of cons, a lot of problems with this. I'm not going to get into them today. But the idea is to understand that it creates a more aligned system than liquidity mining does. By the way, if you're wondering, this is the interface of Paladin. That's what we do mostly today. We enable projects to distribute liquidity incentives through vote incentives on various marketplaces like Curve, Balancer, Bunny, FX Protocol, which you'll hear about later. That's the only plug I'll do about today. That's the second one. The one you've almost all been participating in is points. Points is a bit of a special beast because points is everything and nothing at the same time. That's why it works so well. Because what you're doing with points is you're telling people, hey, we're going to do leaderboard. The more you're a participant to what we do, the more we're going to give you points. And the next question is, what is points? We'll see. So it gives a lot more leeway for teams to build whatever they want and take a decision. However, it also has a huge risk because if you under-deliver, people are going to nuke your project. You can look at a lot of examples I'm not going to quote today, but if you play the points game and you are disappointing, it will just instantly kill your project. However, as I mentioned, it gives a lot more leeway. So it has the advantage of not having you commit to a tokenomics system from the get-go. It can let the imagination of people run much wilder than it would have normally. So that's the huge example of points. Now the last one, which is not at all a cycle today, but I expect to take a lot more space in our ecosystem in the coming few years, is what I call liquidity matching. So liquidity matching used to be called liquidity direction with Connect Finance or Opal. They used to do this on Curve Balancer. And the latest one is called liquidity order book, built by a protocol called Royco. The idea is that it deconstructs from the base everything we just said before, which is basically you're paying people to bring in liquidity. And instead, it's finding LPs, doing an order book, so basically rebuilding what we've done in TradFi, but specifically for liquidity, not for swapping or anything. It's just for people who provide liquidity. You want to spend incentives, someone else is ready to give liquidity to a certain tier of assets, and it matches them together. I have no idea how well it will work. I'm very hopeful on this one, but the idea is that today liquidity is a huge spectrum, and I've only talked about AMMs, right? Only about swapping. So just in swapping, we have liquidity mining, vote incentives, points, liquidity matching. We're seeing the same in lending. We're probably going to see the same around specifically stable coins and even potentially about fundraising. Thought it makes a lot less sense because fundraising is a lot more risk on and early into a project's life. What I'm trying to say here is that liquidity is constantly evolving, and it's really important that you as a project try to project yourself as much as possible and tailor to your needs, to how much liquidity do you have. If you don't need 100 million TVL from the get-go, don't do a huge points campaign. You can do something very moderate and grow as you need. What we're trying to do today at Paladin is basically combining all of these different marketplaces, these places to bring to get liquidity, and creating an allocator on top, which is going to help projects just distribute the incentive at the right place in an optimized fashion. So if you're interested in this, feel free to ping me just after. But in the meantime, I just want to finish maybe with something important, is where is liquidity going? Are we going back to the TradFi model? I mean, we've seen it with liquidity matching. It's very close, right? It's important to understand that the way a lot of public companies work is they actually pay a market maker to make the liquidity on centralized exchange, right? So it's a similar model, just with different actors, maybe what we could call modern or algorithmic market makers, right? That's what AMM kind of is. But it's a bit further than that, in the sense that today we have two systems that are kind of in conflict, that are getting born out of crypto, which I call open finance and decentralized finance. I think Brice gave a talk this morning about this, in the sense that today, if we want to build that something that's going to be fully decentralized, you're going to need to build tools that are entirely autonomous. And the truth is that the more we're trying to integrate, to mass adopt what's happening in traditional finance, the more we're just going to be traditional finance on-chain. The problem is, it's not a startup that's founded by $5, $10, $20 million that's going to be able to fight against the biggest banks and the biggest traditional finance actors, right? It's going to take decades, and they're probably going to get acquired, which is what we saw with Syntax. So there's two roads. One is play for mass adoption, the fastest possible, become open finance. The second one is decentralized finance, try to build the most autonomous technology possible that's going to provide the most resilient liquidity. This is the path we're choosing. You do you. Thank you. Oh, spoke 19 minutes. Was 1 minute short.
Questions? Hi, thanks for the great talk. Okay, so my question is, does the market have to have a certain size to trade? For example, with the NFT collections, we have seen that they converge towards 10,000, and that's probably because you need a certain amount to trade, right? Is there some level, for example, when you tokenize stocks in a company or something, you have to have a certain number of them for liquidity to appear? Do you have any thoughts on those sizes?
Well, NFTs are a bit of a special beast because by default they can't be fractionalized, right? Unlike traditional ERC20. I'm not specialized around NFTs, so I'm not going to focus on it. But it's a whole question about offer and demand. So you basically need to have people that want to buy and that want to sell, and that's how you get liquidity as a whole. Or you need an AMM that's going to be able to handle all of this, someone to provide liquidity. The truth is, 10,000 can be too little, can be too much. It just depends on the actual cycle of swaps that you're going to have. I think the 10,000 numbers maybe comes more from customs than anything else. I agree that the less assets you have and the less fungible they are, the harder it is to trade, so the less liquid it is. It's the example of real estate, right? I'm not sure I answered your question. Perfect. Any other questions?
So I'm going to come on and ask it. Put it this way, guys. What a lot to take in, a lot to. I love coming down and sitting here and just immersing myself with these, conversations and with what's going on in Figue. You opened me up to something there because obviously as the future moves more into the market-making aspects of things, with the rise of a lot of these ecosystems, which way do you see the market trending towards? You mentioned OpenFi and more centralized finance. What is the middle ground there, and how can we really bring that liquidity into ecosystems like yours and like others that are obviously making those changes in the space?
I think open finance is the middle ground. So it's between traditional finance, something very compliant, that's fully already in shape, and decentralized finance, something that's much more organic, that's much more autonomous. and the middle ground is open finance. The problem with such a system is that they're basically going to have to become fully compliant. MiCA came live 3 days ago. That's the stablecoin regulation. So now that this is live, they're going to have to comply with all of this. It's basically going to have them push entirely towards TradFi, but on-chain. So for me, open finance is the middle ground. The problem is that there's two types of people in crypto. You have the ones who are zealots, the people who are here to push in decentralization, and you have the people who are here to make money. If you want to make money and build the next Google, you're going to have to do open finance, at least in the next 10, 20 years. If you want to build a decentralized and resilient system, you should do DeFi. So it's different type of bets. Not everyone wants to become a billionaire, and I don't think that's the most important thing that can be built in crypto. Because what has value is going to be the things that are going to be built for the next centuries, not the next years.
Amazing, thanks. And there must be a couple other questions out there. Maybe I've got about 8 minutes till our next speaker comes in. So anybody want to take an opportunity to ask Figue a question while we've got him? Nobody? Okay, well, I can't thank you enough for sharing some time with us today. I'm going to link up with you backstage. Amazing. So we're going to big round of applause for Figue, guys. Huge one, come on.